Chapter 8. Ruy Lopez, Classical Defense, Cordel Gambit. f5. The Cordel Gambit. Black refuses to answer White's plan by moving the bishop. Instead, Black attacks the center from the flank. This is the whole personality of the line. If White slowly builds a center, Black wants to break it before it becomes stable. d4. First compare this with the immediate capture on c6. White should not be frightened into passivity. If Black opens the f-pawn, White opens the center and attacks the bishop. Compared with bishop takes c6, this move asks a harder question because the bishop on c5 is now under fire. Let's see what happens if bishop takes c6 is played instead of d4. Bishop takes c6. White can capture immediately, but this is less testing than d4. White has not yet used the d-pawn to attack the bishop on c5. d takes c6. Knight takes e5. Bishop d6. This is the important move. Black chases the knight before taking on e4. Let's see what happens if f takes e4 is played instead of bishop d6. F takes e4. If Black grabs the e-pawn too soon, White has a concrete tactic. Queen h5, check. g6. Knight takes g6. Knight f6. Queen e5, check. Bishop e7. Knight takes h8. White wins the rook in the corner. This is clearly good for White, so Black should not rush. Let's return back to the main line. d4. Bishop takes e5. d takes e5. Queen takes d1, check. King takes d1. F takes e4. Queens are off, White's king has lost castling rights, and Black has won the e4 pawn. Black has the easier game. Let's return back to the main line. F takes e4. Black accepts the challenge. The point is not to win a pawn cleanly. The point is to create a race. White hits the bishop and center. Black tries to use open lines before White consolidates. Bishop takes c6. A precise move. White removes the defender on c6 before taking on e5. In many Ruy Lopez sidelines, this exchange is not about the bishop pair, it is about making Black's center less stable. Let's see what happens if knight takes e5 is played instead of bishop takes c6. Knight takes e5. Taking at once is natural, but Black gets tactical resources. Knight takes e5. If Black can simplify while White's bishop on b5 is still attacked by the center, White has not asked the hardest question. D takes e5. Black hits the bishop and prepares to recover the e5 pawn. This is why the main line first removes the c6 knight. Let's return back to the main line. D takes c6. Black recaptures toward the center and opens the queen and bishop lines. Black has accepted doubled c-pawns, but the game is sharp enough that structure is not the only story. Knight takes e5. White restores material and places a knight in the center. This is the position every Cordel Gambit player must understand. Black has activity, but White has a strong knight and a cleaner long-term structure. Bishop d6. Black immediately questions the knight. This is the practical point of the gambit. Black does not want a slow bad structure. Black wants every White central piece to be chased, pinned, or forced to make a decision. Queen h5, check. White uses the loosened king side. This check is one reason Black's f5 push is double-edged. Black gained activity, but also weakened the diagonal toward h5 and the dark squares around the king. Forced in spirit. Black blocks the check and attacks the queen. Now White must be disciplined. The pawn on g6 looks tempting, but it is tactically dangerous. Queen e2. This is the point of the retreat. White does not grab the g-pawn. White keeps the knight on e5, keeps the queen connected to the center, and avoids giving Black the forcing rook lift attack. The position remains easier for White to handle than the greedy nx g6 lines. Let's see what happens if knight takes g6 is played instead of queen e2. Knight takes g6. This capture looks attractive, but it gives Black forcing play. Knight f6. Black attacks the queen and develops with tempo. Queen h4. One retreat is to keep the queen near the king side. Let's see what happens if queen h6 is played instead of queen h4. Queen h6. Rook g8. Knight e5. Rook takes g2. Bishop g5. Bishop takes e5. D takes e5. Bishop g4. Bishop d2. White tries to hold everything together. Let's see what happens if knight d2 is played instead of bishop d2. Knight d2. Queen d3. f3. This natural defense fails tactically. Let's see what happens if knight f3 is played instead of f3. Knight f3. Bishop takes f3. Black wins by force. Let's return back to the main line. Queen e2, checkmate. The king never found safety. Let's return back to the main line. Queen d3. Black's pieces take over. White won a pawn, but black has the attack. Let's return back to the main line. Rook g8. Knight e5. Bishop takes e5. D takes e5. Queen d3. E takes f6. Bishop g4. This is the warning line. White has one material, but black's queen and bishop are too active. The rook comes to g8, the queen lands on d3, and white's king is still in the center. This is why the calm retreat to e2 is preferred. Let's return back to the main line. Knight f6. Black develops and hits e4 and g4 squares. The g8 knight finally joins the fight. Black usually cannot afford slow moves here, every piece must help justify the pawn advance. Knight d2. White develops with a threat. The knight on d2 now attacks e4. So the next practical question is, why not take that pawn before castling? Kingside castles. Black castles and invites the question. Kingside castles. Now white gets safe before trying to win the e4 pawn. This is the practical rule, in the Cordel Gambit, do not grab every pawn while your king is still in the center. Castle first, then ask black to prove the compensation. Let's see what happens if knight takes e4 is played instead of kingside castles. Knight takes e4. This is the tempting capture before white castles. But this is exactly the wrong moment to take the pawn. White's king is still on e1, and black can trade on e4 and develop with tempo. Knight takes e4. Queen takes e4. Bishop f5. Queen e2. Bishop takes e5. Black should first remove the knight on e5. The tempting bishop g4 would simply lose the bishop to qx g4, so black must be more accurate. Queen c4, check. Queen d5. Queen takes d5, check. C takes d5. D takes e5. Rook on the a file to e8. Black has avoided the tactical mistake and reduced white's attacking knight, but white still keeps a small pull. That is why this early nx e4 is playable only with care. The cleaner practical rule remains the same, castle first, then decide whether the e4 pawn can be taken. Let's return back to the main line. Bishop e6. Black develops the last minor piece and attacks a2 in some lines. This is the model setup, rapid development, pressure, and no apologizing for the pawn structure. Knight on the d file to c4. White centralizes and asks another question. If white can exchange pieces and keep the knight active, black's gambit energy fades. Queen e7. Black keeps pieces coordinated and connects the rooks. The lesson position is balanced in a practical sense, white has the more reliable structure, but black has enough activity to make the game uncomfortable if white drifts. Bishop h6. White targets the rook and dark squares. This is the final teaching point, the Cordel Gambit is playable as a surprise weapon, but black must accept risk. The same f-pawn move that attacks the center also creates dark square hooks for white. Rook on the f-file to e8. Black protects the rook and keeps the e-file contested. Summary, the Cordel Gambit is not a quiet equalizer. It is a challenge. Black says, I know your Spanish plan is c3 and d4, so I will hit the center first. White's answer is to meet force with force, play d4, exchange on c6 at the right moment, avoid the greedy g6 pawn, castle before taking on e4, and then watch the dark squares. As we saw in this lesson, the Cordel Gambit is a practical challenge. Black plays bishop c5 and f5 to hit white's center before it settles. White should answer with d4, use bishop takes c6 at the right moment, avoid greedy pawn grabs, and castle before taking on e4.